You okay? Many years ago, a teacher said to me, truth was found in paradox. Some years later, I read a world teacher who said, look for the true within the false. Look for the false within the true. I think this is really important. I'm going to ask all of you for the next hour, maybe for the next 4 days, to suspend judgment. To sort of step out of yourself and step back for a second, and as I talk and as we talk over the next hour, half an hour, 3 or 4 it should be. If not, I'm going to run through a bunch of slides really fast.
It says an hour. Okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I'm only going to talk for about 35 minutes, and we're going to have some time to talk together. But what I want you to do is to observe yourself and feel inside when I say things that give you tension, that you don't want to believe them, or when you agree with them. Because the biggest challenge us humans have is holding multiple contradictory thoughts in our minds at the same time. Is Jack here? Last year, Jack heard me make an impassioned plea for sustainability in the Congress, the AEC Congress. And later he looked me up and said, Ken, you need to look at the bottom as well. It's got some words in the title there. The virtue of waste. And why we will never run out of energy. And you know, the tendency is to, okay, well that's not quite what I think is right, so I'm not going to read that book. But I read it. And it was very helpful, very enlightening. I'm not sure I agreed with everything, but I got a great deal out of it. So we all of us need to go out of our comfort zones. We need to look at things from multiple points of view in order to really synthesize an understanding and socialize it with each other. So we're going to talk about paradox, the paradox of sustainability. In the spirit of Frank Luntz, look at the framing of that language. Decarbonizing our economy is our most significant economic opportunity since we mobilized for World War II. The goal, decarbonizing our economy. The benefit, significant economic opportunity. And then a time frame, a metaphor for action. Since we mobilized for World War II. Man, think about that. Do you know that when we mobilized for World War II, government suspended the sale of automobiles so industry could manufacture tanks and planes instead? To decarbonize our economy, it's going to take our government in concert with our industry, in concert with non-governmental organizations. It's a mobilization. We've got to act fast. Amazing framing of language. We'll come back to this at the end. Sustainability. We have a hard time talking about it because it means something different to everyone. It means one thing to a farmer. It means something else to a businessman, something else to a politician. And the problem with that word is, A, it doesn't roll off the tongue very well. And what is it? How do you define when you've achieved it? Now, here is a story about sustainability. In this hall at Oxford, the main beams were failing. It's 500 years old. And the campus architect had no idea where he was possibly going to replace these timbers. And in an accidental conversation with the campus gardener, the gardener said to him, well, we've been waiting for you for 500 years. And the architect said, what do you mean? He said, when they built the hall, they planted the trees to replace the beams. That's sustainability. That's thinking over the long term. Now, I heard this story from the Long Now Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization out of San Francisco. Stuart Brand is a founder. Brian Eno is a founder. And Danny Hillis, the inventor of the massively parallel supercomputer, is a founder. And what they're trying to do is to teach us about these complex systems that we're in and to extend our time frame. I find this diagram really powerful, and the more I look at it, the more I learn. because it talks about a scale and a speed, and it talks about nested hierarchies. And the challenge is that our fashion, our commerce, our infrastructure, our governance, and our culture are reaching down into that slow, big earth processes and beginning to shift them. So what the Long Now Foundation is trying to do is to get us to think outside of the quarter, or beyond 2 years in terms of a product, or 5 years. In fact, they want us to think in a 10,000-year time frame, which is roughly the development of our civilization. But they want us to think backwards 10,000 years and forwards 10,000 years. And to help us do that, they're building a clock that will run for 10,000 years. And Brian Eno's figured out a way to have it chime once a year with a different sound for 10,000 years. Now think about that. Think about the design problem of building something that's going to keep accurate time for 10,000 years. The pyramids were just built 5,000 years ago. And within 50 years of their completion, they were already being robbed of their materials. They're also building a 10,000-year library. If you're building a library for 10,000 years, what content do you put into it that might be valuable 10,000 years from now? What might civilization need 10,000 years from now? And their answer is the Rosetta Stone. And they have a web interface, and this is allowing cultures that are at threat and at risk from around the world to record their language and their history. And they're encasing it in a physical medium. They're going to spread it around the planet so that it holds up for 10,000 years and can be discovered easily, visually, with a little bit of technology in terms of being able to magnification. But they're worried. They're so worried that they're sending that out into space. They want to put it on the moon, and they bought a mountain to put one of the clocks in. They're going to have the clocks in various cities, but they're going to have one of them in a mountain, so that it will make it 10,000 years. Now, why would they be thinking like that? All right, so that's a 10,000-year picture. I want to go a little bit farther, okay? We're really going to stretch a little bit. Because now, in the last 50 years, we've come to understand this story about this original flaring forth that occurred 14 billion years ago. An amazing story that we can now tell ourselves as a people. And 10 billion years after that, this thing called Tiamat went supernova with a light that could be seen across the galaxies for 7 days. And out of Tiamat, 10,000 suns were birthed. And the universe lifted materials and atoms and molecules to a higher level of complexity. And one of those suns was our sun. And virtually every molecule in this room and in your body went through Tiamat to get here. And a solar system evolved, which critically put this planet we're on at a certain, it occurred that it was at just the right place, just the right size. It wasn't so small, it was just a solid rock. It wasn't so large, it was a gaseous giant. And geophysical processes began to happen. We know the rest of the story. It's the story of life, this amazing proliferation. It hasn't been easy. There have been massive extinctions along the way, but life has survived. Now, let's put this into a little context. This is a logarithmic time scale. This maps the ice ages from the age of dinosaurs into our age. And significantly, from 10,000 years ago to the present, we've had this really sort of wonderful mild climate. It enabled us to begin to farm, to come together, to build cities, to create higher levels of organization. This, of course, was possible because evolution had put into place this ever-expanding cranial capacity. We evolved language. We have this wonderful opposable thumb. And with these settlements and agriculture and increasing people coming together, sharing ideas. We have this arc of the human enterprise, this growth in our population, which is mirrored, of course, in this exponential curve and the evolution of our technologies and the exponential nature that we're in now and this sort of singularity that we wonder if we're approaching. 65 million years ago, Earth was transformed, we think, from an external meteor. It was the end of the age of dinosaurs. It was the beginning of the age of mammals. We're currently in what's called the Cenozoic era. And the question is, with the level of extinction that's going on now, equal to that extinction, are we about to enter a new era, and what will that era be? Of course, we're not going to find out in our lifetimes. But maybe 500 years from now, people will have some judgment of this. Now, let's talk about the REQUIEM scenarios, a variety of scenarios. Scenarios are really powerful tools. No one knows what's going to happen in the future, but it's helpful to think about alternatives. I do not have a crystal ball, and I really like what Bruce Sterling said in Shaping Things, that the world will be partially unthinkable and partially unimaginable. But effective actors will look at their scenarios and prepare themselves. So one scenario, a world on fire, rising temperatures. Another scenario, extreme climate. Another scenario, water levels rising, coastal plains inundated, mass migrations. Another scenario, we don't make it, which of course is what the Long Now Foundation is worried about, and why they're building a library to capture civilization's information, so if there's a reboot, like what happened during the Dark Ages and the Enlightenment, we'll have the right information to rebuild. There are also utopian visions, and I tend to look at the glass half full, even though my wife thinks I look at it half empty. And I'm a real believer in, I want to help create the Ecozoic era, an era where humans are in harmony with their Earth and with all of life on this planet. But many people think that it will be a Technozoic era, that technology will save us. Of course, this image is from Star Wars, and I never could understand how the Jedi Knight could be from this planet, because it is completely devoid of nature. How could they have discovered the Force, devoid of nature on this mechanical planet? So the central question is the REQUIEM scenario a real possibility? What do you think? I'm done. We got about 5 minutes. Any thoughts? Come on, somebody. Question? Am I full of it? Is there a scenario out there that you can think of that is an alternative to this? You guys don't expect me to just do what Joel did and just keep talking for... Come on now. I know somebody's... There you go.
Well, your scenario all based on the assumption we make on Earth, we know that on space travel, what happens when we go there.
I'm not quite sure I entirely heard your question, but I think it had to do with space travel and what happens when we get off of Earth.
Right. What happens with the Wild West explosion is the wild space explosion.
I think that's a possibility. Maybe we can. What do you guys think? Will we escape to another planet? Not 7 billion of us, no. A few of us might make it. That's a good one. Thank you. I hadn't thought of that. I should get a picture from one of the old science fiction movies up here with a ship going off into space, or 2001. Other comments, thoughts? There's another one.
Well, just as your initial idea was holding contrary thoughts in line, having a different audience here, there would be a bunch of people who would say, everything you have just said is a lie. The world is 6,000 years old. Every graph you've shown, and that may be 20% of the population. And there's another certain percent of the population that is very, very much along the bottom as well, or very simplistic, it's not believe, et cetera, et cetera. So I would just raise the sort of additional issue of, even if you examine scenarios, there's this question of how do you get concerted action.
And I believe that is the central question. And ultimately, you've sort of taken the bang out of my whole presentation. Thank you very much. I'm going to try to speak to that a little bit. I really believe that is the central question, and a lot of it comes down to this thing we're carrying around in this skull, and how we were equipped over time to live in this world, but now we've hit a point where all of our experience from the past isn't helpful for what we're addressing right now as a species. Great observation. I'm going to carry on. Whoops, I should have had it there. So I want to talk a little bit about how we see, which is about mental models, because we're all living in a virtual world. We all construct the world daily, right here. We carry it around with us. We all have a world view. It's our culture. We live in this culture together. Now, one model, one system of thought that's been out there that's famous is the Limits to Growth, Club of Rome. They did a whole bunch of really sophisticated computer modeling. They've done it 3 times now. They have a very sophisticated simulation tool called World 3. And fundamentally, it is based upon the concept that we live on a finite planet and that we can mathematically model and simulate all of these feedback loops, these resources, these stocks, and we can run out a whole bunch of scenarios using this tool. It's essentially based on this notion that we cannot achieve exponential growth forever because we cannot exponentially grow the carrying capacity of a finite planet forever. Hence, limits to growth. And they see essentially 3 options. The S-curve, which says we're going to come up here and we're going to get right in underneath that carrying capacity. Of course, now what we're learning is actually we can't do that because as soon as you slide up into that carrying capacity, you've left no room. There's no resilience for surprise. And it's probable that we'll overshoot and then we'll oscillate over a slightly reduced carrying capacity of Earth. It's possible that we will greatly overshoot, diminish Earth's resources significantly, such that the population will crash and we will be living in a vastly diminished state of existence. That's a possibility. They ran a series of scenarios. The business as usual scenario, and in fact virtually all the scenarios ended up in some form of overshoot and collapse except for one. They call it scenario 9. And in that scenario, according to their mathematical model, they found a set of relationships that allowed 8 billion people to achieve sustainability. The model assumed that from 2001, 2002, population and industrial output is limited, technologies abate pollution, conserve resources, increase land yields, and agricultural land is protected. It's 2008. I don't see any of that happening. Now, Neil Kelly, who was, I believe, a contributing editor for Wired, wrote a really cool little book called Out of Control. And in it, he challenged the Limits to Growth model. And his fundamental point was, yeah, that's a good mathematical model, but what you cannot model is the effective actions of 6 billion people on this planet when they come to grips with this problem. So that model will help us look at scenarios, but it is not a predictor of our situation. And what I find is really powerful is this concept we're headed for, which is sort of new and recent. It's a different set of models. And it says, well, some people look at the world as if nature is flat and we can push it around, do anything we want with it. We aren't going to impact it. Our technologies will work. You know, we're going to be able to fix all this stuff up. No big deal. That's one of those groups of people. Some people think that nature is balanced and it'll just sort of snap us back into an equilibrium and everything will be fine. Some people think that nature is anarchic and that we cannot sort of stay on this plateau we're on in any event. And some people think that nature is resilient. There's this model of resiliency which is very powerful. It's been in evolution for the last 10 to 20 years out of the ecological sciences. It's increasingly being applied to social sciences and organizational sciences. And it suggests that there's this adaptive cycle. And that this adaptive cycle has a process where it builds resources, it increases connectivity, it also tends to get rigid. And then something happens. And some force takes place that busts that adaptive cycle apart. And this is called release. The connectedness of the system explodes. It releases. It drops off in terms of its potential. And what that does is it creates the possibility to reorganize and then rebuild the cycle again. And if you think about businesses or products or ecosystems, it turns out that this is a pretty good model to think with. Now, it's just a model, but it's a pretty good tool to think with. It isn't nature itself, but it seems to be pretty good at describing some of the things we're experiencing. And importantly is this concept that it's functioning at different levels. So it functions at an atmosphere level. It functions at the level of the Everglades. It functions at the level of a lake or a patch of grass. And that significant variables occur here, and that a change in the system can affect the level above or the level below. But the level above tends to have memory, and the level below tends to be sort of more innovative, more experimental. And this is how evolution has been moving forward. It functions across time scales, it functions across different bioregions, and it really explains why, even though the Club of Rome and the limits to growth were saying, okay, we're going to collapse by 1985, and it didn't happen, and now it's 2008, it hasn't happened yet. It's because we've in this amazingly resilient system. But the system does have points where it changes. This model can be used three-dimensionally, and this is where you really know, okay, this is a human model, because humans are good at spatial things, and we really like 3 dimensions. But it's a powerful tool, because it explains some things like the rigidity trap, where governments tend to fall in, where they become very organized, or companies fall in, and they become very rigid, and they are inflexible to change. It explains things like the poverty trap, where a system has become so sort of diminished that it cannot reorganize and come back up out of it without an external force. It's a very powerful tool. But I think this is the most powerful aspect of it. Basins of attraction. So think for a second about a variable. Think about CO2. And as that's rolling around in that basin, sometimes coming high, sometimes going low, it tends to stay in the basin, and the shape of the basin and the depth of the basin are the various variables and aspects of the system. And a tipping point is defined by that red dashed line between 2 basins. And what happens when you cross a tipping point is you slide from one basin into the other basin. And this is the real worry. We can handle the temperature getting a little warmer. We can handle raising oceans. But if our atmosphere flips into a different stability regime, we may not be able to ever get it back to what we've experienced for the last 10,000 years. And we don't have enough skill to predict what that stability regime will be. We're running a tremendous risk. Okay, so those are models in our minds. So here's a model. Opportunity and crisis. From the death of environmentalism to the politics of possibility. Are you looking at the glass half empty, or are you looking at it half full? And now we're going to look at it half empty for a while, then we're going to look at it half full, and then we'll see what you think. I'm going to go fast. Okay. A finite world. A slow-moving variable. Fortunately, we have the science to see it. In a very complex system, the carbon cycle, which we're continuing to learn about. And of course, the amazing thing about this variable is from the ice records we know that for the last 45,000 years, it has oscillated between 200 and 300 parts per million. Now that is a really small proportion. And when you think about that variable oscillating in that range, and that is sort of nature, not resilient, but nature, I don't remember now, it sort of seems to have an equilibrium. I'll always go there, right? Except in the last 150 years, we have reached into Earth. We've grabbed this powerful, really powerful hydrocarbon. We've brought it up. We've turned it into this amazingly powerful, dense, liquid fuel. We've exploded it. I mean, think about, 6,000 RPM, 10,000 RPM. We've exploded it in our machines such that we're now off the charts in terms of where we've been for the last 45,000 years. And if we stick with business as usual, we're going to hit 600 parts per million, which is likely to put us into a tipping point and an entirely different atmosphere than the one we're experiencing right now. Now, that hydrocarbon oil is a very interesting thing to have a discussion about with anyone. There's a lot of it out there. There's still a lot left, and there are tar sands, and there are shales, we got gas and whatnot. But M. King Hubbert, which is why this is called Hubbert's curve, in the 50s predicted the peaking of oil in the United States. He said it was going to happen sometime in the early 70s, and all of his geological friends said, Hubbert, you're nut, forget about it, no way, go away. And of course we know what happened in 1973. And we know that the United States in 1971 went from a net oil exporter to a beginning to net oil import. We didn't know it, though, until 1973, because it takes a while to get all the information in and to look at the numbers. And when you're on the peak, it's, you're on a peak. It's level. The thing that Hubbert discovered, and he discovered it before we gave a name to it, was scale-free networks. Because what he did was he realized that the rate of discovery precedes the rate of production. And if you know when discovery begins to drop off, you can then mathematically understand when production begins to peak. And yeah, we've got a lot of oil left. And maybe we're going to peak this year, maybe we peaked last year, maybe 2010, maybe 2020. There's a lot of debate about that right now, but we will peak. And the second half of that oil's a lot harder to get, and it's a lot dirtier. And oh, by the way, if we aren't sequestering carbon, we're continuing to let that little variable continue to climb. And our whole civilization, for the last 150 years, what we've built is an oil civilization. Cheap fossil fuels. The real challenge is China and India and other countries are coming on board. They've got what we want. And as production begins to diminish, they've got dollars, they want to buy it. It opens up this economic gap with tremendous potential for geopolitical strife and incredible volatility in pricing. Now you add on top of that our global world. How many of you have heard of Jared Diamond? Wrote a couple of really great books, Guns, Germs, and Steel, Collapse, The Third Chimpanzee. In Collapse, he tells the story of a series of civilizations across the planet, past and present, that did collapse. And the most famous one, of course, is the Easter Island story. The end of the long Polynesian chain. The Polynesians came to the island. It was a bountiful, fruitful, productive island. They grew their population up. They built those statues. They slowly deforested their hillsides. They slowly ate up their food on the land and then around the island. And then before they knew it, because they deforested their hillsides, they didn't have canoes that were big enough to get out far enough to get more food or to get back to the other islands. And when the Europeans found them, they'd collapsed from 20,000 people down to about 1,600 people, and they were living in a near savage state of existence. That was an island. And all of these various collapses are somewhat isolated from each other. But in our global world, we are the island. We're all connected, and we're going faster and faster. The impact equation. It's a function of population, affluence, and technology. Right now, at a middle income, we've already exceeded sustainability. And only China has really taken this issue on. It's a critical issue. In India, they tried to, a democracy, and Indira Gandhi lost that election because she wanted to promote population control. So, extreme weather, rising temperatures, we know this story. We know this potential. Here's a really powerful one, is that our food is getting now tied to the price of fuel. When we went over $60 a barrel, it made sense to begin building ethanol distilleries in Iowa, And now the farmers are selling selling corn to the distilleries, no longer to people. In fact, Iowa has now gone from a net corn exporter to not exporting any corn at all, because it's all getting sucked up in the ethanol distilleries. And one tank of gas in your suburb from ethanol would feed a person for a year in terms of the food value equivalent. So our food is getting tied to the price of oil, and we all know what's been going on there. Water shortages, obviously water table problems all around the planet, but I find this one particularly interesting because what I'm trying to do is sort of look at the systemic relationships. When those glaciers are drawn down, they're rivers up in the sky, and in the wintertime they store water, and they release it in the summer, which feeds the people of India and China, the great river valleys, the Indus River, the Ganges, the Yellow. And right now they think at the rate we're going, by 2050, those glaciers will be gone. And when they're gone, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be very hungry. And that is also occurring here. And with that water issue comes desertification. On the right, out of the Tibetan Plateau, you see a huge dust storm. Those dust storms are reaching the west coast of the United States now on a regular basis. The one that worries me, perhaps more than the rest of them, is what we've done with our chemistry. What unknown things have we yet to discover? And then, of course, how could we, I got to watch out for myself. Yeah, Ken, you're a bleeding heart liberal. How could we be so callous as to not really worry about extinctions? Of course, we're all out there just trying to, make those mortgage payments. I am too. I flew here. Failed states. That's where, again, it's a global world. And what really surprised me was when I saw, hey, look at that. We've got Afghanistan. Oh, Pakistan. Wow, I had no idea Pakistan was at such a risk of being a failed state. And then I began to learn about the water problems along the Indus River Valley. But one of them that is really interesting is Haiti. And this is a satellite image, and that line right there is the dividing line with Haiti on the left and the Dominican Republic on the right. They share the same island. One of them has deforested its landscape entirely. One of them has not. Purely a function of the choices that their societies made. So, that's looking at it pretty pessimistically. That's the crisis, right? Let's look at the other side. Let's look at the opportunity, the economic opportunity. We know that if we can educate females around the world, we will whack this population problem right over the head. And we know it's not too expensive. We can do a whole bunch of things for a mere $77 billion. And that's really, when you think about it, that's just chump change compared to what we've been spending lately. And it's not just us, it would be the whole world. We know we're making progress on poverty. In particular, China, with its amazing economic growth, has lifted millions of people out of poverty. India, countless millions. But you have to temper it a little bit. We've still got a lot of serious issues in Africa. But overall, the last 20 years have been good. It's been a little downtick recently, but been good, based on economic opportunity. And we know that we've got to make changes in order to feed people, and we know how to do that. We know how to get our agricultural system off of oil. We know how to get back to enriching our crops. Okay, but we're not going to do it with monocrops. And we're not going to do it with big farms that are all monocropped, depending upon petroleum products. Because remember what we said about peak oil. It's going to start getting a lot more difficult, and petroleum is in everything. It's in all of our, machines. It's everything we do to raise plants. It's what fueled the Green Revolution. It's what enabled us to grow this population. And we have a plan for stabilizing carbon. Two gentlemen from Princeton identified this plan. They've identified 15 wedges, and all we have to do is hit 8 of them. And the beauty of this wedge concept is just do a little bit this year, and do a little bit more next year, and keep at it. And if we do that with just 8 of these programs, we can stabilize carbon at its present level, and maybe even begin to turn it back down. In my industry, we know how to build better buildings, make them more energy efficient. We know how to use renewables. It's still a lot of work to go, but we know we can do it if we can get going with it and get the fees and get the commissions and get the owners all lined up. And an interesting team of an architect, William McDonough, and a chemist, Michael Brungart, have identified this cradle-to-cradle concept. They say, look, our economy, which is a linear economy, could be made a circular economy. All you have to do is understand you've got a nutrient stream, all of those materials which can return to Earth. A technical stream, those materials which you can recycle. And a monstrous hybrid stream. And that is the responsibility of the manufacturer. You can put these hybrid materials out there, but you're responsible for them, and you're responsible for parking them and storing them and taking care of them until they can be returned to the technical stream or the nutrient stream. And interestingly enough, the EU has picked up on this. They have an end-of-life vehicles initiative in the EU. They're aiming for 2020. They're going to have a hard time hitting it. They're trying to create their whole automobile industry so every automobile returns to the manufacturer for recycling. Now think about what that does to the European Union in terms of their competitiveness and their ability to survive. That's an amazing initiative. We know that we need to and know how to put our cities together, and we know we need to reorganize them because, especially here in the States, our settlement pattern was all based on the automobile. Now here's an interesting one. Look at those 2 vehicles on the right. The Aptera, coming out of California this year, 300 miles to the gallon. $30,000. Technically speaking, it's a motorcycle. Seat 2 people. Down on the bottom, the Tata. Now that one's wild. $2,500 for that vehicle, and it gets 60 miles to the gallon. But it burns traditional fuels. And here's the real moral of the story. We humans aren't good at really understanding what our unintended consequences might be, or the ramifications of things over time. This is a car that's being developed in India for the Indian people, and it's going to do, an amazing thing in terms of giving access to an automobile to a whole bunch of people who don't have it right now. But the corollary is that many more people that are driving to the gas station and buying fuel and putting CO2 up into the atmosphere. The unintended consequences. And that's a tough one. I mean, I'm all for the Indian people. And we understand that it's really an issue of ecological design in everything that we do. That we have to look at all of our systems embedded in nature and design them to be sustainable over time. With the key idea that really, even sustainability, what is sustainability? It's merely survival. The real goal is to get beyond sustainability towards regenerative and restorative development which heals the planet. And we've got good stories we can tell about that. We are restoring the Earth in various ways, and, according to Lester Brown with Plan B, a mere $113 billion would pretty well take care of it. Again, that's kind of chump change when you think about it, really in terms of the big picture. And, of course, Paul Hawkins thinks that the real, most optimistic way of looking at this is this, because what has happened is that the Internet has enabled millions of people and non-governmental organizations to collaborate. And he sees the Internet and those people as kind of Earth's immune system. And there are people all across this planet that are taking these issues on in their local environments, in their bioregions, and globally. So there's a lot to be optimistic about. And I have no idea which way it's going to go. How do you think it's going to go? The jet fins. That's another one I need to get up there. Yeah. And who knows? Maybe 3 years from now it'll be here, and maybe it runs off solar energy. But what are the unintended consequences? I mean, that's the thing about this that's so tough, is that we tend to look at simple causes and effects, but it's this vast, interconnected, complex system. And how do we tease all of this out and understand it? Can we possibly? Good comment.
Well, what this really means is that things oftentimes don't change as fast as we expect it to do. And more than likely, any change that we see will occur much more gradually in our houses, not just based on the economy. What the appropriate economy is something that I don't know.
Right, no, we don't. And you hit on another paradox, because, yeah, the things we think are going to happen fast tend to happen slow, and then all of a sudden out of left field, bam, something happens like the internet. Where'd that come from?
The supercapacitor and geothermal energy change.
I hope so. Another comment.
One slide up there talking about population growth and education and population. We've got to know the argument here that education is one of the things. So the problem is because of the knowledge of the opportunity. This is included on pretty well accepted theory of psychology and technology. Everybody knows
I think you've just hit on another paradox. Now, I think there is statistical information that says that if you get education, you get opportunity. If you get opportunity, you become smarter about family planning, and you're maybe not, having so many kids. But
I'll rebut that for this specific case, which is, I think it is pretty well documented, especially in developing countries, where if girls stay in school past 7th grade, each year they say they have one per child. And there is a whole just subcommittee to this conversation, because we're assuming that we humans want to stay on this planet. The quickest way to reduce pollution and imbalance in the planet is to reduce the human population. So I think in this particular case, education of girls in developing countries will have the effect of reducing the number of kids, will have the effect of reducing the environmental load. But that's more than
I think you're right. It's going to take work on many fronts at the same time. It's not, again, we have this tendency to sort of want to identify a single thing which will produce a single result. Peter, you had another comment?
I was going to say that the education first of probably looks like ice cream causes race, because even Mr. Radio was on ice cream concern. As it turns out, the other one thing race is warm weather, and the other one thing is the wealth. People are wealthy, they don't really do that in their case. And so that's really probably the most thing.
Other fantastic comments. Other thoughts?
Some of the same studies on female education in undeveloped countries is also accompanied by electrification. That causes a dramatic drop in birth rate or something like that.
Yeah, it's a whole different world when we have when we can use something other than fire to read by at nighttime. Joel.
I'm a little slow on the update to that. I'm not quite seeing how to think globally and act globally connection here in the way that is likely to have some positive effect. If you have any tips to share with us about that.
Well, no, not particularly. I mean, it's a great slogan. It makes a lot of sense, and I think we have to do all of the above. We do have to think globally. It's important to understand we're on one planet. We're going to come back to that. We do need to think locally. We need to think about local food. We need to think bioregionally. That's a real important one. That's the scale in between the immediate locality, and the globe. Bioregionally is really important. So now we need a new slogan. think locally, or think globally, act locally, and do something in your bioregion. I don't know. We'll come up with some good framing for that. Good one. Other thoughts, questions? One more, and then I'll get back into it. There it is.
Just have a question. We talked about education and the role for education. How do we justify 5% of the world population using 25% of the global community to be, and obviously there's a correlation between the greenhouse gases and the consumption of energy. So I think we live in one of the highest educated regions of the earth, and we still don't do anything of the earth.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting one. And Machiavelli said that political virtue is born of crisis alone, and it is darn difficult to change our behavior. Anyone else want to rebut or add to that? Please.
That correlates well to your output on the model that
Right, and Thomas Jefferson was a real advocate for revolution, you know, and we're in a society right now where we've really optimized our use of resources, and we're really sort of in this rigidity trap, and it's going to take some big external force to help us reorganize ourselves. And hopefully, you know, I kind of think we need that punch right now. And quite frankly, this is blasphemy for saying this, but I think the best thing that could happen to the globe right now is a major recession. Because we're working so hard in my business, it's hard to change. We're just running as fast as we can. A major recession right now would slow down our use of oil and give us a chance to rethink things a little bit, but I know that's blasphemy. Okay. So are we sustainable? Is the REQUIEM scenario a real possibility? Again, Bruce Sterling. I loved his book that we got last year. I was so excited. I read the whole thing while I was here. The quest for a sustainable world may succeed or it may fail. If it fails, the world will become unthinkable. If it works, the world will become unimaginable. And he thinks, actually, it's likely to become a little bit of both. The big worry is biofeedback. It's one thing to talk about this little variable that's growing. But the big worry is biofeedback as a whole bunch of other systems began to kick in and reinforce that variable. And then we can no longer stop it. It's a runaway train. And Jared Diamond identified 5 factors in collapse. I mean, those are interesting factors. But in the end, he was optimistic. Because now we have science, we have the internet, we have a written history and literature, and if we respond appropriately, we can make the choices to achieve sustainability. He ended optimistic in his book, Collapse. But, and this is really interesting, because peak population, wealth, resource consumption, and waste production are accompanied by peak environmental impacts, approaching the limit at which impact outstrips resources, we now understand why societies decline so swiftly after they've hit their peak. And when you look at a global world going as fast as we are, we're just getting better and better and faster at getting the oil out and burning it and shipping things all over the world. We're just racing towards the edge of the cliff with a trunk full of money. So we need to carefully assess our risks and understand that none of us can predict the future. But I really like Dietrich Dorner, Ordinary Failure. Brad told me to read this. It was great. Because the basic message here is this. We humans are good at spatial things. We're really bad at complex systems that take place over time. We're really bad at the temporal. And things just fail in ordinary ways. Because we're not good in pressure cooker situations at dealing with complex systems. And if ever there was a complex system that we were dealing with, it is Earth's biosphere and human interaction with it. And if you really want an interesting book to read, this is one of those little jewels. It's like 90 pages. Ethics for a Finite World, an essay concerning a sustainable future. And here, finally, is an articulation of what it means to be sustainable in the context of ethics. An obligation of an ethics for a finite world to maintain the durability and resilience of ecosystems that make moral life possible. In other words, if you do something that does not maintain durability and resilience, in this new definition of ethics, you've committed a sin. And if you think about it, our ethical system evolved in a time when we had few people and many resources, and we've completely changed the equation. We have many people, and resources are beginning to diminish. And so will we adopt this ethic? And does this ethic begin to define what sustainability is? And if all of your actions are leaning towards helping ecosystems become more durable and more resilient, then we're headed towards sustainability and we're increasing options for the future. If your actions are removing resilience and durability, you're diminishing options for the future. So how are we going to do this? Well, we're going to have to work together, and I think that a big part of it is visual language, because the systems we're dealing with are difficult to write about and understand in a linear context, even talk about in a linear speech. Diagrams, images, complex, messy systems. And we need to bring people together and socialize that complexity in a way that people can see it, talk about it, disagree about it, understand the scenarios, but have a genuine dialogue. We need to look at those scenarios and understand the probability and the possibility for moving between those scenarios, and then prepare ourselves to deal with those scenarios as they come about. And we need to understand that our organizations are in fact living systems, and we're all seeing that. There's no doubt about it. We need to think of them as living systems, and we need to realign their missions so that organizations can collaborate to take on this sustainability issue. This is difficult stuff to do. It's the core of what we need to do, to get us human beings collaborating, able to make effective decisions together. And that model of the adaptive cycle, again, it maps pretty well into organizations in a variety of different contexts. It's a really powerful way of thinking about our set of circumstances at present. Oh, I meant to delete this because I'm probably running out of room. But the basic idea here is that those models, it's really interesting, because the hierarchist is the one that sort of tends to believe that we can do it through government. The individualist is the one that tends to believe free markets will take care of this. The egalitarian is the one that believes, we've got to act now in a communitarian way to take care of this. And here's the paradox. It's like paper, rock, scissors. Paper covers the rock covers the scissors cut the paper. All three of these views work well when they work together. Any one of them does not lead us to sustainability. And here is a set of simulations where they tested this idea. The power of the computer in simulations is you can run these variables out and look at them in a whole bunch of ways, and you can look at 10,000 cycles or 20,000 cycles and see what happens. Now again, it's just a model. But what they learned was that if the world was in fact in an unstable place, the egalitarian was going to tend to maximize economic output and minimize temperature increases. They're just looking at those two variables. If it was stable within limits, the egalitarian would tend to keep the temperature down, but it was the individualist, the free market person, who maximized economy. And if the world is in fact stable, well, it turns out that the individualist, of course, does create the most economic opportunity, and the hierarchist just barely sort of does the best job at keeping the temperatures down. And so what does this mean? It means that we've got to back up for a second and quit saying the free market will take care of everything, or the government will take care of everything, or the NGOs will take care of everything. We need all of them working together in this mobilization effort. We've got to quit jumping to these simplistic ideas, in my humble opinion. So I think a big part of this is learning to see anew and have a new worldview and mental attitude. And Consilience by Edward Wilson is this amazingly powerful book, because he believes that we're now getting to a point with our science where we're beginning to understand the true functioning of a human being. That no longer do we need to have this artificial separation of the humanities and the sciences. That we can unify them in an understanding of our world and who we are. And underpinning that is the new science of the MRI and what psychologists and philosophers are now able to understand about human behavior is radically changing our understanding of ourselves as human beings. And one of those understandings, of course, is that what we're biologically evolved to do is to see evil in Darth Vader or Hitler. We see it with the tilt of an eye, you know, that particular kind of a mustache, or whatever it is, or the way you're carrying your body. What we're not good at all at seeing is this invisible threat that only science has revealed to us. We have not evolved to address that. We have evolved to address the threat of a tiger or a person. And Joseph Chilton Pearce, the author of Cracking the Cosmic Egg, Magical Child, and the Biology of Transcendence, really sees another aspect of this, because now we understand that we don't just have a brain in our heads. There's a reason why we talk about our heart. There's a reason why we talk about a gut feeling. Our nervous system runs throughout our whole body. So we're this whole system. And he believes we're wired to transcend ourselves. And that already on this planet some great transcendent leaders have been here. And that the key, in terms of this tipping point, is further transcendence of human beings. So the issue then becomes, Peter, that we learn to come together as people and not just see with our mind, but to see and think with our heart and our gut, and to communicate and to listen to each other and to respect each other's point of views, and yet also be able to have a tough conversation about the issues. It's not easy. There are ways to do it. If we approach it right, and if you can sort of step out of the judgments that you would have normally and listen for a while. But to me, and this is my personal opinion, I think the most powerful story is this story that's told by Brian Swimme, Thomas Berry. It's an amazing book called The Universe Story. Because now, for the first time, you know, if you think about it in the past, we've had the creation myths of the Hopi Indians, the Taoists, our great religious traditions. And now, for the first time, our scientists are beginning to speak with more clarity. And now, for the first time, we have a creation story for Earth and for every single person on this Earth. Not just the individual nations or the individual tribes, which of course is what we've evolved with. We now have a unifying story. A story where science and the humanities are actually merged in this consilience. And it was, believe it or not, it was Albert Einstein that coined the term cosmogenesis. You all know the second law of thermodynamics, right? Universe tends towards entropy. That was what we were all trained with, right? Einstein said, yeah, that's true, but guess what? There's also the law of cosmogenesis. The universe is tending towards increasing complexity, such that when we went through Tiamat, new molecules evolved that birthed us. And so the universe puts tremendous stresses on things, and they either fail or they survive. And that's where we're at. We have tremendous stress coming our way. And the question is, will we pass through that gate and have a civilization 10,000 years from now which is strong and powerful? Will we collapse into a state of near savagery and reboot? Will we go extinct? I believe that this cosmogenesis story is a story that can unify us. And I think we need to tell this story around the world. That, by the way, is a picture of the eye of God. It's beautiful what scientists have been able to show us over the last 50 years. So, who was it that said this? Now, I didn't tell you at the beginning, because if I'd told you, it would have turned at least half of you off. I think. Maybe I don't have my crowd quite right. That framing was, of course, Mr. Bill Clinton, speaking at Greenbuild. He's got two big initiatives going on. Green schools and remodeling existing buildings, which are just throwing so much heat out and energy out, it's a tremendous waste. But he went on to say, and I think this is so powerful, he's subpoints. I heard him, I listened to him, designers, engineers, architects, we're at the forefront of proving this. And if we do, then we will be in a position to go to China and India and share with them green, clean technologies and help them decarbonize their economies. So, I ran right up to my time limit, but if anyone has any thoughts or questions you've got to throw out there, Joel, it looks like you've got something you want to say.
I wanted to say thank you so much, Ken.